13 Major League players have now opted out of the 2020 season. There are continued questions involving testing with the start of the regular season happening next week. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in for another edition of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. As always, we are streaming live at 110sportsmedia.com/live as part of the 110 Sports Network. All our shows, that's the J-Mole Show with Josh Molnix, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring, and this show are available on demand at 110sportsmedia.com. Just click on the videos tab. They're also available on demand on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for 110 Sports. And also excited to tell you about a new addition to 110 Sports, a weekly newsletter delivering you the latest 110 Sports written content, shows, and podcasts right to your inbox. That's every Friday. To subscribe, just go to 110sportsmedia.com. On the right side of the homepage, you'll see a newsletter section with all you need to know to subscribe to all the information right there. Busy show for you today here on Around the Bases. Last week we talked a lot about testing, and we were just trying to keep up with the headlines and everything that was going on. And we are going to do that again today briefly here at the top of the show. The testing problems that Major League Baseball has had are continuing. There are some continuing questions about how baseball is going to be able to get going given the delays in testing results coming to teams and players. We'll talk about that and all your latest headlines today, and then we're going to get into some more of the fun stuff. As promised on last Thursday's show, we are starting division previews here today on Around the Bases in going with the written content that we are publishing on 110sportsmedia.com. Out today, I have pieces on the website looking at three major questions for each team in the NL West and in the AL West, and those are the two divisions we're going to talk about here on today's show. So here's a look at the rundown that we have for you for today's show. We're going to start things off, as promised, with the headlines, talking about the latest on testing, talking about the latest players who've opted out. Since we last talked on Thursday, there's been a number of key players who have opted out, as that number is up to 13 Major League players. Then we have some injury updates for you on some players, also information about players who had been away from their teams arriving at training camps over the weekend. We'll talk about that. And then we'll get into our division previews, so the NL West and the AL West here on today's show. So let's go ahead and jump right in with our headlines. We'll get right to it because we have a lot to get to today. And we'll start with continued testing questions. So we talked about again last week the major problems that baseball was having in getting test results to players and to teams in the promised 24 to 48 hour turnaround so that workouts and things could continue to run smoothly. Last week we saw a number of problems with that. Things seemed to quiet down on that front as far as major problems over the weekend, but over the last couple of days there have been a few notable problems with delays in test results and also some new questions that have arisen about the system. So 6 Chicago Cubs, including manager David Ross, did not attend the team's practice Monday morning as they awaited test results from the weekend. So that was a delay that the team took, that the team had to take in their practices because of a delay in testing results. Meanwhile, Houston Astros pitchers were not present for the team's workouts on Sunday at Minute Maid Park. This was after the team canceled a full workout on Saturday after a staff member was exposed to someone who did test positive for COVID-19 outside the organization. So this was someone outside the organization who tested positive that a staff member came in contact with, and that led all Houston Astros pitchers had to be held from Sunday's workouts. Additionally, some reporting for the Washington Post this has been a while back on Thursday, but since we last talked, indicated that baseball did not test players or staff for COVID-19 on 2 chartered flights, bringing in those players and staff from the Dominican Republic, and that since multiple players have tested positive, other players from that group and staff members are isolating. Twins first baseman Miguel Sano and several members of the Washington Nationals were among those on the flight, according to the Post. An MLB spokesman said that there were several obstacles to overcome in the situation, including that tests are much harder to come by in the Dominican Republic and that government restrictions made the shipping of saliva samples between countries very difficult. So obviously that was a concern that was brought up in a report from Thursday. Those are, of course, those obstacles are are understandable, and to some extent that makes sense, those obstacles that are there, but that's still a problem in sort of just showing how big of an obstacle, how big of a problem, how much of an undertaking this is from baseball's perspective. Because of course, not every player was in the United States after spring training was canceled back in March, or the season was postponed. Many players went back to their home countries from the Dominican Republic and other areas, and then baseball had to bring them back to the States, and that led to a host of problems there. Also, some reporting from Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic yesterday that the Diamondbacks are among multiple teams who have used an outside lab for COVID-19 testing. Now, the Diamondbacks said that they've only used the outside lab about 20 times, which is a really small portion of the team's total tests. It's not as big of a story as many people are probably making it out to be, but this still is undoubtedly a bad look for baseball, for Major League Baseball. It doesn't inspire confidence in the testing system that MLB has set up when teams are feeling the need to go to outside sources. Of course, it also brings up potential ethical questions and teams going to outside labs and potentially taking away tests from the general public of people who are actually exhibiting symptoms, who are really sick. So there are ethical questions there as well. So that's going to be something to monitor in the coming days. Another important thing as far as the testing situation, how it's developed, the Royals announced on Saturday that catcher Cam Gallagher had tested positive for COVID-19. And what makes this case notable, and what a lot of people, baseball media members, were talking about on Twitter, is that Gallagher had just played in the team's inter-squad game the night before after he'd taken that test, and he was feeling fine. He was not feeling any symptoms. And this underscores the complexity of this situation, the problem with the unavoidable, in many cases, at least to some extent, lag in test results, which is that you could have a player or a staff member who has contracted COVID-19, who is not exhibiting symptoms, who's taken a test, but isn't getting those results. There's no reason to think that they have it. They go out and play. They interact with others, even with social distancing guidelines. They potentially infect others who may not end up being asymptomatic. Of course, we all know that this can be very, very serious, even for young people. So this shows sort of the situation, underscores the importance of the social distancing measures that are in place in baseball right now, and illustrates that even in a perfect environment, in the current circumstances, even if baseball's testing system is working perfectly as far as the 24 to 48 hour turnaround on test results, this is tricky. The Athletic's Mark Carrick tweeted, "By playing, baseball isn't trying to thread one needle, it's trying to thread 1,800 of them." This is a really tricky situation, and even with the best measures taken, the best testing protocols, the players doing all the right things, this is still tricky, and nothing is guaranteed. So it's just an important thing that people had been talking about over the weekend. Also on Monday, the Athletic's Brittany Garoli and Ken Rosenthal reported that health protocols in the nation's capital and in Los Angeles County are actually helping to explain why certain members of the Dodgers and the Nationals have not reported to training camps despite multiple negative tests. Local regulations in those areas require a quarantining period of 14 days, and the report from the Athletic saying the issue might create additional competitive disadvantages for both clubs if it lingers into the regular season. So that's sort of all the little points within the continued testing questions. Clearly, there's still some delays in test results. We've heard, again, we talked about it last week, that baseball is looking for an additional lab. We haven't heard any new information on that lately. But there are also just a number of questions, a number of things underscoring how complicated of a process this is and how easy it is for the system to fall apart, even when everybody's doing their best. Even when the system is working, there are still complexities, whether they be outside of the sports world in general, other factors that could complicate things, and it's really important to keep in mind that this is just a very tricky situation that everyone's in right now. A second Headline for you today: the Blue Jays have reportedly reached out to the ownership of their AAA affiliate, the Buffalo Bisons, about playing their home games at their stadium. That, according to a report from the Buffalo News, the Blue Jays are still focused on playing their home games at the Rogers Center for now, and that's their home stadium. That's where they are holding their training camp. The team had gotten clearance from Canadian health officials to hold their training camp at the Rogers Center, but they had not received such approval for regular season games, which is leading the team to understandably express some concern, looking for backup options. One of them is potentially going down to Florida, but of course, Florida is one of the states that is experiencing one of the biggest coronavirus surges in the world right now, frankly. So that's a tricky situation for the Blue Jays. Of course, the start of the regular season is next week, the latter half of next week. The second half of next week is when the regular season begins, so there's still, I'm sure, a lot of scrambling and anxiety in the Blue Jays front office now as the team looks to make sure they have a place to play come the start of the regular season. A couple of information about some new positive tests. Yankees closer Aroldis Chapman tested positive for COVID-19 and has shown minor symptoms that, according to manager Aaron Boone, telling to reporters on Saturday. Boone said that Chapman will be away from the team for the foreseeable future, adding that lefty Zach Britton would be a natural option to assume the closer role in Chapman's absence. As I mentioned at the top, 13 Major League players have now opted out of the 2020 season. That includes Giants catcher Buster Posey, who announced on Friday that he will be opting out of the 2020 season, that he and his wife are adopting twins who were born prematurely. They're in stable condition in the ICU, but they're going to be there for some time. So Buster Posey, the face of the Giants franchise, opting out of the 2020 season. Posey saying, quote, "From a baseball standpoint, it was a tough decision. From a family standpoint, and feeling like I'm making a decision to protect our children, I feel like it was relatively easy." Also on Friday, we learned that White Sox young starting pitcher Michael Kopech would be opting out of the 2020 season. The 24-year-old prospect was on his way back from Tommy John surgery. And then just yesterday, we learned that Cardinals closer Jordan Hicks would become that 13th Major League player to opt out of the 2020 season, citing pre-existing health concerns. Hicks is a type 1 diabetic. He has also been recovering from Tommy John's surgery. The Athletic's Mark Saxon reporting that type 1 diabetes is listed by MLB as a pre-existing condition, and thus Hicks will be paid in 2020 and his service clock will be advanced 1 year. All right. We have a number of players who have returned to training camps in the last couple of days over the weekend and yesterday. A number of players, some of them who had tested positive for COVID-19, some of them who had just not reported to camp yet, and the team was unable to comment. So Texas Rangers outfielder Joey Gallo, who had tested positive, though there was some confusion there because, as we talked about last week, he'd also tested negative in the same period. He's returned to the Rangers. He's gotten clearance to return to the Rangers. He still doesn't actually know if he ever did have COVID-19. Charlie Blackmon, who became the first Major League Baseball player known to have COVID-19, has returned to the Rockies after passing protocols. Toronto outfielder Lourdes Gurriel has joined the team. Padres outfielder Tommy Pham, who had tested positive, has joined the team. Same with Phillies infielder Scott Kingery. Arizona outfielder Starling Marte back at camp. Same for Dodgers second baseman Gavin Lux and their closer Kenley Jansen. A couple of injury updates for you here. Minnesota Twins outfielder Byron Buxton was carted off the field last night in Minnesota after suffering a left foot injury. Manager Rocco Baldelli said an initial exam did not show anything serious, and the team is cautiously optimistic about Buxton's status. The 26-year-old former top prospect has had horrible luck with injuries in recent years, so we certainly hope for the best for him in that situation. Yankees outfielder Aaron Judge was held out of workouts over the weekend due to neck stiffness, but Aaron Boone saying Monday that he's feeling better and that he could return to inter-squad action today on this Tuesday. Meanwhile, Mets outfielder Yoenis Cespedes said over the weekend he is certain he'll be ready for the start of this season. Cespedes is coming back from multiple heel surgeries and a fractured left ankle. We all know, though, when he's healthy, when he's at his best, he is one of the most feared hitters in baseball, so it'll be interesting to see how he fares in the shortened season. Atlanta Braves starting pitcher Cole Hamels skipped a side session on Saturday due to triceps tendonitis. Hamels hasn't faced hitters in training camp yet and appears the potential for him missing the start of the season definitely exists. And Arizona first baseman Christian Walker is day-to-day with a right groin strain. A couple of other notes for you here. Cleveland outfielder Delino DeShields was placed on the 10-day injured list on Monday with no reason provided by the team. DeShields had previously tested positive for COVID-19, but had rejoined the team over the weekend after getting those 2 negative tests required. David O'Brien of The Athletic tweeted yesterday that he heard from someone close to the Braves first baseman that Freddie Freeman is doing much better. Freeman, of course, had tested positive for COVID-19, and in a series of posts on Instagram, his wife had tweeted that he was had posted that he was experiencing some significant symptoms. So obviously, good news to hear that he is doing better. Houston Astros designated hitter Yordan Alvarez and starting pitcher Jose Urquidy were placed on the injured list on Monday. Manager Dusty Baker just saying that the pair has a condition that prevents them from reporting to the field. White Sox infielder Yoan Moncada was placed on the injured list. The team is not specifying the injury there. He had not been at training camp with the team for the summer training camp. MLB.com's Mark Feinsand reported over the weekend that the Orioles are interested in free agent outfielder Yasiel Puig and have made at least one offer. I mentioned on the show, I think it may have been Thursday or Tuesday of last week, we talked about Puig very briefly, and I mentioned that I thought he would probably be set to sign sometime in the coming days leading up to the season. Still no additional reporting on that. Baltimore's apparently made an offer, but we haven't heard anything since then. I would have to think that he would be signing with the team pretty darn soon, unless he intends to opt out of the season. So I'll have to keep an eye out for that. Puig, definitely one of the more electric, exciting players in baseball. The Padres have released veteran second baseman Brian Dozier. Boston starting pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez is now doubtful for opening day. Manager Rob Renicky acknowledged that on Friday. Rodriguez had tested positive and has not yet rejoined the team. Nathan Eovaldi seems likely to make the opening day start for the Red Sox. Finally, top hitting prospect Vladimir Guerrero Jr. of the Blue Jays. Third base has been his position for the last several years. He is now going to be shifting across the diamond. The team announcing he will be playing first base and spending time in the designated hitter role. Moving forward, that means Travis Shaw, who was slated to play first base, will slide over to third this season. Guerrero Jr., again, one of the best hitting prospects in all of baseball. Struggled a little bit last year, but the ceiling is obviously really high for him. So we'll see how that pans out in the shortened season. So that is a long-winded look at some of the Major League Baseball headlines right now. One other thing that's just come in here within the last few minutes, John Heyman of MLB Network is reporting that 11 MLB umpires have opted out of participating in the 2020 season. It appears we don't have specifics yet, but the 11 seems like a pretty significant number. Obviously, of course, this is very understandable for any umpire, just like it is with any player who wants to opt out of the season. But we don't have specifics or information on the potential impact of those opt-outs just yet. We'll continue to monitor that and see if anything else comes out throughout the duration of this show. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break here on Around the Bases. When we come back, we're going to get into the fun stuff. We're going to talk about division previews. As promised last week, the baseball season set to begin basically a week and a half from now. And we've been talking a lot about testing, a lot about what makes this season so unique and so tricky, which is, of course, important. But we're also really close to a 60-game regular season in Major League Baseball, so it is also very relevant to talk about the things we normally do at the beginning of a season, which includes division previews, who's the likely favorite. We will discuss each team in the NL West and then the AL West coming up here on the show. Stay with us. You're watching Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here, streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. I'm Chris Brown, and as promised, we're going to dive right now into some really fun, exciting preseason discussion, division by division. We're going to talk about each team. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Western divisions, the AL West and the NL West. Then on Thursday's show, we'll talk about the NL and AL Central. And then on next Tuesday's show, we'll talk about the AL and NL East. And so basically, the way this is going to work, we're going to go through each team in each division. We're going to look at the team's projected record. We'll talk about a player who I think, player to watch for each team, a key storyline for each team, some overall thoughts on the team and their ability to compete in the division this year in the shortened season. Now, it's important to note this is just going to be sort of a quick touch on each team. We've only got about 2 or 3 minutes to talk about each team. Have further analysis on all these teams on the stories that are up today at 110sportsmedia.com. Look at 3 key questions for each team in the AL West and in the NL West. So we'll touch on some of that through in today's show, but a lot of that, for full analysis, for more information, just click on those stories at 110sportsmedia.com. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start with the NL West, and we're going to go in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, the Diamondbacks are projected to go 31-29 by Fangraphs, and that's what we're going to be using for projections. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with every one of these, but just as sort of a baseline, we're going to go with Fangraphs' projected record, and I'll discuss whether I think that's right or not. The Diamondbacks are an interesting team in 2020. I think they're definitely a team that has the ability to make a run and challenge for a postseason spot. One key player to watch for them is Madison Bumgarner, who was signed to a major contract away from the Giants for the first time in his career. He has not fared well on the road away from Giants Park, the Giants Stadium, in the last couple of seasons. He's also getting up there in years, so it'll be interesting to see how much he has left in the tank. So there could be some concerns there. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. One key storyline for the Diamondbacks is going to be their ability to back up their breakout 2019 performances, and this is particularly on the offensive end. There are a number of key veteran players who had career years just last year at an advanced age. So Ketel Marte, he wasn't particularly old, but he is in his age 25 season, coming off a 32 home run, 10 steal, 329 season for the Diamondbacks. Eduardo Escobar is coming off of a major power breakout at the age of 30. He hit 35 home runs, an MLB leading 10 triples. And then Christian Walker, their first baseman, launched 29 home runs at age 28. So that was a major breakout. Those 3 players, Christian Walker, Eduardo Escobar, and Ketel Marte, hit 96 home runs last year. That's nearly half of the Diamondbacks' home runs. So whether they're able to back that up this year is going to be key for their success or not. Diamondbacks, the rotation scares me a little bit. I don't think they necessarily have the depth that they need, though they do have a really exciting young pitcher in Zach Gallen, who I'm really high on. Madison Bumgarner, I really have a feeling he's not going to fare well, that he is not going to be able to get back to an elite level. But I could be very wrong on that. Robbie Ray is a pitcher who's a durable arm for them, but not really a high ceiling. It's sort of known what he is right now, which is a lot of strikeouts, but a bit of a high ERA. That offense, though, if some guys can repeat their 2019 performances, could be one of the best in baseball, legitimately, if things line up that way. Interesting team to watch. I think they'll definitely be in the competition for an NL wildcard spot, and in a shortened season, stranger things have happened. They could definitely challenge for the division title. I certainly wouldn't predict it. I don't think their pitching overall is strong enough, and I think there are enough questions with their offense, but an interesting team to watch in 2020 nonetheless. The Rockies. The Rockies are an interesting team in that a couple of moves from them this past offseason could have really made them more interesting. Nolan Arenado expressing in the offseason saying he felt a lot of disrespect from the front office, and ESPN's Jeff Passan reporting at the time that his frustration was rooted in the team's lack of activity this past offseason. The Rockies are a team that I really, like I said, I think could be a couple moves away from being a potential contender, but they're just shedding pieces and they're not adding enough right now. Obviously, that's a great offense with Nolan Arenado, with Charlie Blackmon, with Trevor Story, with David Dahl, who's our player to watch for the Rockies. He's an exciting young player. He's battled some injuries, but I think playing half his games at Coors Field, this could be a real breakout year for Dahl. And in a best case scenario, he could be doing essentially what Charlie Blackmon has been doing in his peak, which is he could be an over 300 hitter. He could steal 10 to 15 bags. He could hit 30-plus home runs. He's an exciting player, and like I said, that offense is very good. But it's the Rockies teams that have competed, that offense has to be really, really good to overcome the situation that the team has playing in Coors Field, their pitching situation. I don't think the Rockies have much of a chance of competing in the NL West this year. There's a battle for the team at second base, a couple of young, exciting players, Garrett Hampson and Brendan Rodgers, top prospect for the Rockies, battling it out for playing time at second base, with Daniel Murphy sliding into the DH role, most likely most days for the Rockies. They're an interesting team. I mean, there's something there, but I don't think that offense is really high enough, it's deep enough to overcome the pitching deficiencies this team has. It's just not a very appealing rotation. Herman Marquez has some upside, but he just struggles at home like most Rockies pitchers do, and I don't think they have the offense to overcome that. So I don't see the Rockies competing. But again, shortened season, they could get hot. They have the ability, they have the offense to challenge for a wild card spot. I just would not predict it at all. And now we'll move on to the favorites in the NL West. That is the Dodgers. The Dodgers made the big moves this offseason. They of course trading for Mookie Betts with the hope that they can get him, that the Betts can help the team get over the hump in October. This is a team that has made it to the Fall Classic and lost in 2 of the last 3 years. The pressure is on the Dodgers big time in 2020, and they certainly have the ability to compete. They would have been the favorites in the NL West even without the addition of Mookie Betts. But you bring in Betts, you've got the reigning MVP in Cody Bellinger. Of course, there are some questions of whether or not Bellinger can repeat the level of production that he had last year, especially when he got off to such a hot start, and then stepped back a little bit in performance down the stretch. So there are some questions as to what Bellinger can back up his MVP season to quite that degree. But really he doesn't have to, because in a lineup that also has Mookie Betts, Justin Turner, Corey Seager, Max Muncy, there's a great offense in place with the Dodgers. They're certainly the favorites in the NL West. I think nobody's going to go out. I don't think there's any value in predicting anybody other than the Dodgers to win the NL West. Could it happen? Yes, of course, somebody else could win. But I'm pretty much as confident in the Dodgers winning the NL West as I am in any team winning their division in the shortened season. One thing that's going to be interesting for the Dodgers, the team without David Price, who opted out of the 2020 season. The Dodgers have been a team with great starting pitcher depth the past several years. They've used that to their advantage. They've shuffled guys into the bullpen. They've had manipulated their use of the IL and given pitchers rest. And they have a lot of pitchers who are injury prone. But Hyunjin Ryu is now with the Blue Jays. Kenta Maeda now with the Twins. They're going to be relying on some young pitching this season more than ever before. So we'll see Walker Buehler take on an increased role behind Clayton Kershaw in their rotation. Julio Arias, Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin. Those are all players who are 26 or younger. May is 22. Urias is 23. Some young pitchers they're going to need to take on an increased role for the Dodgers this season. So that'll be something to watch. But again, Dodgers are the favorite. Not a ton to say, though, other than that they are under great pressure. There's probably no more pressure on any team in baseball other than the Dodgers except for maybe the Astros. And we'll talk about the Astros here coming up in just a little bit. All right, so we'll shift gears here now to the Padres. The Padres are an interesting team because I think that they're a pretty common pick, and I really like the Padres as a team that could potentially surprise a lot of people in the shortened season. Now, I'm not saying that I project them to even make the playoffs because I don't. Fangraphs projects the Padres with a 31-29 record in 2020. And I guess that's probably about what I would project them at as well. But this is a team that definitely has the potential to surprise a lot of people in the shortened season. They've got Manny Machado and Eric Hosmer still in the prime-ish of their careers. They're not on too much of an advanced age yet. They're joined by Fernando Tatis, 21-year-old. He hit .317 with 22 homers and 16 steals in 84 games last year before getting hurt. He'll be returning for the Padres. We'll see how much of what he did was legit. And then they acquired Tommy Pham from the Rays following a 21-homer, 25-steal season. That's a really formidable top four in the lineup for the Padres. You factor in the team's outstanding bullpen. MLB.com's Anthony Castrovince ranked the Padres as having the second best bullpen in baseball just a few weeks ago, behind only the Yankees, who, as we mentioned, have lost or going to be without Aroldis Chapman for the immediate future, for the foreseeable future. So I would actually say that, given the situation right now, to start the season, I think the Padres have the best back end of the bullpen in all of baseball. They have Kirby Yates, their closer. Last year, 41 saves, a 1.19 ERA. Just an incredible year from Kirby Yates. One of the best. He may be the best closer. I would probably say he is the best closer in baseball right now. And he's joined the back end of that bullpen by relievers Emilio Pagan, who had a 2.31 ERA, 12 strikeouts per nine last year, and Drew Pomerantz, who as a reliever in 2019 posted a 1.88 ERA, so that's an outstanding back end of the bullpen for the Padres. One thing I'm going to be watching with the Padres is their starting rotation. Their rotation is behind Chris Paddock, is Dinelson Lamet, Garrett Richards, Zach Davies, and Joey Lucchesi. There's certainly some potential there, but not a ton of proven high-level talent. One key for, and my player to watch in 2020 for the Padres is Chris Paddock, who last year in his rookie season, 140-plus innings, 3.33 ERA, 153 strikeouts, one of the best young pitchers in baseball. The team has been carefully monitoring his innings and limiting his innings in the shortened season, though. That's not really going to be as much of a factor. They can really let him loose, and they're going to need him to be productive because he's really the only pitcher that I'm really confident in their starting rotation. But perhaps their starting rotation doesn't have to be super high level with their bullpen, and that's one of the things I discuss in the story that's online at 110sportsmedia.com. With that outstanding bullpen, that could take on a really increased level of importance in the shortened season. So the Padres, with the potential for a really good offense, at least at the top, a starting pitcher who could be one of the best in baseball, finally getting a chance to maybe really get let go and pitch as much as, not with the kind of innings restrictions he had last season, and the team's outstanding back end of the bullpen. I think this is a team that definitely could surprise in 2020. Final NL West team is the San Francisco Giants, and the Giants are projected for a 27-33 record by Fangraphs in 2020, and I think that's being generous. The Giants, not a very good baseball team right now. They just don't have the personnel. Of course, as we talked about, Buster Posey opting out of the 2020 season. One of the questions for them, where they go at catcher, they have their number one prospect, number 2 overall picked in the 2018 draft, Joey Bart. Potential for him to get some playing time at the catcher position, but management saying, and Gabe Kapler, their manager, saying the last couple of days they likely won't be turning to him. He's not ready yet. This is a team that still has veterans like Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford, but there's just not a lot to be excited about. One player who I am excited about is Mike Yastrzemski. He's the grandson of the Hall of Famer Carl Yastrzemski. He was a veteran minor leaguer, over 700 games in the minors. He made his major league debut last season, and he was the Giants' best hitter. He led the club with an 852 OPS. He had 21 home runs, 22 doubles, 272 average in 107 games. Yastrzemski, again, as a career minor leaguer, not really young, but he is a guy who, if he can back up his 2020 or his 2019 performance this season, could be part of the Giants' next playoff push, which is likely going to be a couple years from now. I don't see them competing in the shortened season, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a few interesting storylines, including Gabe Kapler. Kapler in getting his second chance as a major league manager after a really rough 2 years in Philadelphia. And there were positive ways to look at it. The Phillies, were better than they had been the last couple of years before that under Kapler. But the expectations were really high with guys like Andrew McCutchen and Aaron Nola and Jake Arrieta and JT Realmuto, and the Phillies really underperformed. Kapler was seen as an analytical first kind of guy, kind of manager, but some of the decisions he made were really questionable. Fans were really upset. He got fired after the end of last season, quickly picked up by the Giants. And his approach of analytics, an emphasis on that, may fall in line with the Giants organization much better than the Phillies. But he's going to need to show something quickly. He's not going to be on a really, really long leash. And even in a shortened season in which the Giants really have no chance of competing, there are still ways that he can show some signs of improvement and show that he's the right guy to bring the Giants back into playoff contention in the years ahead. But again, the Giants, not a very great team, not a team. This is one of those teams that I would be very, very surprised to see competing, even in the shortened season, which I think opens the field for a lot more teams to potentially compete. So, with that in mind, those are your NL West teams. Just to kind of sum up the NL West, this is the Dodgers division to lose. Everyone is picking the Dodgers to win this division. There's really no, controversy here. There's no debate. There's no, oh, well, if this happens, it's that team. The Dodgers are the favorite to win the NL West, and according to Fangraphs numbers, they're actually picked for the most wins by their projections. The Dodgers are picked to go 37-23. That's the highest win total in all of baseball. I would be very surprised if they don't win that division. Even if they don't, they're going to make the playoffs. And there's a lot of pressure after falling short in the World Series in 2 of the last 3 years. There's a lot of pressure on the Dodgers. That being said, there are a couple other teams in the NL West that I'm interested in, who I think could certainly make a push for a playoff spot, for a wild card spot. In particular, the Diamondbacks, whose offense, if some of these guys can repeat their performances from 2019, Ketel Marte, Christian Walker, Eduardo Escobar, team has added Starling Marte and Cole Calhoun to their outfield. That offense could be outstanding. If Bumgarner can be productive at the top of that rotation, Diamondbacks could definitely make a push for a playoff spot. And the Padres, as I mentioned, also a team that I think could certainly surprise a lot of people. Rockies and the Giants, though, I don't see much hope for making the playoffs in 2020. So that's just a quick look at the NL West. I could have talked for another 20 minutes just about the NL West. Again, as I said, 110sportsmedia.com. For each of those teams, I have 3 major questions. Some of those we covered. Some of those we have not talked about today. So you can read that at 110sportsmedia.com. So when we come back, we're going to go ahead and take a short break here. When we come back, we're going to do the same thing for the AL West. We'll talk about each AL West team. This is an interesting division as well. That's coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. We talked about before the last break here. We went through each of the NL West teams. Now we're going to do the same with the AL West, and we're going to start with the Houston Astros. The Astros are projected to go 35-25 by Fangraphs in 2020. That is the second highest win total in all of baseball in these projections. The Astros are an interesting team, of course, in a regular season scenario. One of the biggest storylines going into the season would be the Astros in the sign stealing scandal from this past off season. Does it carry over? The scrutiny from the fans, from the media, and of course other headlines: the shortening of the season, the delay in starting, the ongoing pandemic, the testing problems. All these things have pushed, understandably, that storyline to the back burner, but there's still going to be questions with that. Of course, if the Astros get off to a slow start offensively, there are going to be people who ask the questions about the impact of the sign stealing scandal. But there are other concerns for the Astros this season, even though they are the general favorite, the consensus to win the AL West. Their starting pitching is much more contingent on older pitchers succeeding. It's much more. There's much more risk involved with their starting pitching than in the past. Obviously, Garrett Cole now with the New York Yankees, so the Astros are going to be leaning on a 36 and 37-year-old starters. So Justin Verlander is a player to watch. He's coming back from a lat strain and groin surgery, which would have sidelined him in the start of a regular season. So he's apparently healthy now. He's even made some changes to his mechanics, but there's always the risk of re-injury there. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but there is some risk there. Also, that sort of replacing Cole in that rotation is Zach Greinke, who remained one of the top starters in baseball in his mid-30s, but he's 36 years old. There's always risk involved there, so there's a lot more pressure on those two guys, or there's a lot more leaning on those two guys to be productive in the shortened season, because behind that, the Astros rotation is not as deep as it's been in previous years. Lance McCullers sliding in as the number 3 starter. He's coming back from Tommy John, which he could be fine, he could be great, but there's always some risk involved in asking too much of someone coming back from Tommy John right out of the gate, and then there's just a bit of a mess of a battle for the 4th and 5th spots in the Astros rotation. Obviously, that offense is still outstanding. I mean, it's still George Springer, Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve, Carlos Correa. The team may be without Yordan Alvarez to begin the season, as we talked about. They've got Michael Brantley. This is a great offense. It's also a great team, and it's a team that you have to pick to win the AL West. But there is some risk involved if the wrong players get hurt, if it's the pitching, if one or two of those top starting pitchers takes a step back or gets hurt, this team could definitely be in trouble. They're definitely more vulnerable on the starting pitching front. And of course, one of the major storylines of the season for the Astros is Dusty Baker, the veteran manager, a 1-year contract to guide this team through this rough period. His decision, the hiring of Baker, makes sense in a lot of ways. Widely respected by players, a veteran manager who can handle the media and whatnot, but he's also an old school manager who does not rely on analytics and a lot of new approaches, which is a lot of what the Astros have been known to do, which is they're very much an analytical first team, a pioneering team in new ideas. And that's definitely a clash with who Dusty Baker has been. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Obviously, they thought that his leadership and his abilities and his veteran presence will be the most important thing. But I think it's going to be interesting to see if there is any sort of clash, whether it's a philosophical clash or how that happens, how that plays out this year for the Astros. Definitely the favorite in the AL West, definitely more vulnerable on the pitching side than they've been in recent years. Next up in the AL West is the Angels. Fangraphs projects the Angels to finish with a 30-30 record. I'm a little bit more optimistic on the Angels than that. This is a team that's made some improvements. The big one, of course, the big name, the signing of Anthony Rendon. to a 7-year, $245 million contract. He provides some outstanding protection in the lineup for Mike Trout that he hasn't had in recent years, with Albert Pujols in decline, Justin Upton hurt for most of last year. But the addition of Rendon in that lineup, one of the best third basemen in baseball, with the best hitter in baseball in Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, who, as he's declined, still putting up some decent numbers. He says he feels really good this year, this coming into this shortened season. Justin Upton's coming back from injury. Then you've got Shohei Ohtani. That lineup definitely has the potential to be really good. Now, where I have a lot of questions is in the starting rotation for the Angels. So I see, Andrew Heaney, Shohei Ohtani, and then you've got Julio Teheran, Dylan Bundy, Griffin Canning as potential candidates or locked into their other rotation spots. There's definitely some concern amongst their starting pitching that they don't have enough high-end starting pitching, and that they're an injury or two away from just being in a mess on the pitching side. Their bullpen isn't super great. So I definitely have questions on the pitching end, and I think if they struggle, it's going to be because their pitching lets them down. Their pitching just isn't enough. It isn't good enough. But that offense, really exciting. I think the Angels could definitely challenge for a wild card spot if things break right in 2020, though I don't believe they have an outstanding amount of depth compared to other teams in the division. Of course, a player to watch for the Angels in 2020, Shohei Ohtani, his return to the mound after Tommy John surgery. That's going to be interesting to watch. Apparently, he's been struggling a little bit with his command in training camp, so it may not be fair to ask him to be lights out in his return to the mound. Also an outstanding hitter, so we'll see how that works out for Ohtani. And they have Joe Madden now as the Angels manager, so he could be creative. He's a creative manager, an interesting guy, so we'll see how that works out for the Angels in 2020. I wouldn't pick them for probably even a playoff spot, but I think that they definitely have that capability. Next up in the AL West is the Oakland Athletics. Fangraphs projects the A's for a 32-28 record. The A's are an really intriguing team to me. Of course, they have some starting pitching concerns as well. Mike Fiers, AJ Puck. They've got some interesting young arms as well in that rotation. Projected for that rotation, Jesus Luzardo, Frankie Montas, Sean Manaea. That rotation could be sneaky good, and I think there could be some pitchers in there who really emerge as some of the better pitchers in the American League this year. And that offense for the A's is outstanding. I mean, Marcus Semien coming off a career year, Matt Chapman at third, Matt Olson at first. Second base is a little bit of a hole. There's a competition for who will handle second base for the A's. Then you throw in Stephen Piscotty back in right field. Ramon Laureano had an outstanding year in center. And Mark Canha in left was really impressive down the stretch for the A's last season. One player that I'm going to be interested in watching is Chris Davis, their designated hitter. He hit 247 4 consecutive years. Until last season, he was as reliable as it comes for 40-plus home runs season after season. Last year, he dealt with a hand injury, which he said zapped some of his power. He was having to choke up on the bat. His power went down, his average went down, but some players on the Athletics, I think it was Stephen Piscotty, was quoted as saying that Davis looks great in training camp. I think he could be an outstanding bounce-back candidate. I'm really confident in his ability to get back to where he was before this past season. Although, of course, he is getting older, so there are some questions there. The thing that I'm really interested in with the A's is their ability to avoid a slow start, because the A's, the way they operate, they get off to a slow start, and then after the All-Star break, they kick it into gear and go on an outstanding stretch. That just seems like how it goes year after year. They posted a better second-half record than first-half record in each of the last 3 seasons. It's just how the A's are. They are okay for the first half of the season, and then they go on an incredible run. They get it together, but there's not going to be time for that in 2020. If the A's don't get off to a mediocre, a subpar start, there's not going to be time to recover. By the time they would recover, it's too late, and go on an outstanding run, it would be too late. So the A's are going to need to get off to a better start in 2020. But they're a team that I am excited about. Obviously, that offense is great, but I think they've got young pitching that really has some potential, and I think they could definitely, I definitely would have them penciled in for a wild card spot in the American League. Moving on now to the Mariners. The Mariners are one of the absolute worst teams in baseball. There's just no way around it. They're projected to go 24-36, and I would actually be less optimistic than that. The Mariners are, aside from their center fielder Malik Smith and their third baseman Kyle Seager, every one of the other projected starting hitters for the team, those other 7 bats have an average of just 263 major league at-bats in their career. So they're going with a bunch of young guys, and that's going to be sort of one of the storylines of the season. They've got some interesting young prospects. The team's 4th-rated prospect, Evan White, is in line to start at first base, even though he did not play above Double-A last year. They've got a player, Shed Long, who's going to get an opportunity to prove he's the team's second baseman of the future, and a former first-round draft pick, Kyle Lewis, in their lineup. So they've got some interesting young players, but their rotation is a mess. They're just not a very exciting team. One player that I am going to be watching is Dan Vogelbach, the designated hitter. Last year he had 30 home runs, 76 RBIs with a really poor average. But the first half of the season, 21 homers, about a 240 average. Second half, 162 average with 9 home runs. So what version of Dan Vogelbach shows up will be interesting. An interesting question for the Mariners in 2020. Not going to spend too much more time with the Mariners, though, because they're just not a great baseball team. They've traded away a lot of good pieces. They're not going to compete in 2020, even in the shortened season, in my estimation, for sure. Final team in the AL West is the Texas Rangers. Fangraphs projects the Rangers for a 28-32 record. This is a team that I see having a wide range of potential outcomes. A best-case scenario for the Rangers, I could see them being in the hunt for a playoff spot, a wild card spot most likely. But that's a best-case scenario that I don't know what the chances of that are really going to be, because that offense is not very deep. Shin-Soo Choo has been a constantly underrated player. Elvis Andrus still has something left in the tank, I believe. Joey Gallo, we all know, is one of the best power hitters in baseball. But aside from that, there's a lot of unproven or uninspiring players in their lineup. Ronald Guzman is their starting first baseman. Rougned Odor at second. Obviously, there's upside there, but also incredible downside. This is not an outstanding lineup. Their pitching staff is what is really intriguing. The Rangers have Corey Kluber, the former Cy Young Award winner, who is looking to bounce back after a 5.80 ERA in 7 starts last season before suffering a fractured arm. But before that, for the 5 years before that, Kluber had been 200-plus innings. He led the AL in wins twice, 3-time All-Star. He's 34 years old, so there's some reason to think he could be beginning to decline, but we've also seen pitchers like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, who were top-tier pitchers like Kluber, continue that production into their late 30s. So whether or not Kluber can turn it around or can rebound back to his prior numbers will be interesting to see for the Rangers in 2020. Also, the backing up. Also, another question for the Rangers: whether or not a couple of veteran starting pitchers will be able to back up career years. That's Mike Minor and Lance Lynn. Minor had a 3.59 ERA in 2019. He won 14 games, was an All-Star for the first time, but he hadn't done anything like that in his past. He hadn't. This was his best season without a doubt. And Lance Lynn, who's in line to start opening day for the Rangers, struck out 246 batters in a career-high 208 and a third innings in 2019. A breakout. He's not a young guy either. It seems unlikely that either of those pitchers will be able to replicate that production exactly ever again, potentially. But if they can get close to replicating that success, if they've really found something else, found some sort of a new strategy, with those two pitchers, if they're able to replicate their success, if Corey Kluber is able to rebound to his previous form, that's an outstanding top three of your rotation for the Texas Rangers. And if they're able to find enough offense, a lot of ifs in here, they could be an interesting team in 2020. I don't see it. I wouldn't project it because there's too many ifs. There's too many, this has to fall right, and that has to fall right, and that has to fall right. I would not project it, but is it possible? Yes, and there's definitely a couple intriguing storylines with the Rangers. So final thoughts on the AL West. Like the NL West, there's really only one team that anyone is picking to win the division. The Astros, I can't see. I mean, obviously in a shortened season, I could see other teams winning, but the Astros, the clear favorite, and I have no problem with that, other than to say that I think it's important to note their vulnerability at the top of the starting rotation. That if the team were to lose Verlander or Greinke, or one of them were to regress significantly, this team could be in a tricky spot on the pitching end. But that offense is just so good, and this is a team that's been able to develop pitchers. I think that they'll win that division, but it'll be interesting to see come playoff time without the outstanding starting pitching depth, potentially, if they could run into some problems there. Lance McCullers could be an X factor for the team in his return from Tommy John surgery. As far as other teams in the AL West, Mariners are going to finish at the bottom of the division. I'm pretty confident in that. The Rangers, everything needs to kind of break right for them to compete. The Angels, I don't think they have enough starting pitching, but they're a really interesting team. And the A's, I'm really excited about because their combination of a great offense and some really intriguing young arms. I'm really excited about the A's. As always, in 2020, I think they're definitely going to be in the running for a playoff spot, assuming they can avoid getting off to their slow start. So even though the Astros are the clear favorite to win the AL West, I think there's a lot of intriguing other teams in this division, a lot of storylines to follow throughout the year. So that is a look at our first two divisions. On Thursday, again, we're going to be looking at the NL Central and the AL Central divisions in a similar fashion. And then next Tuesday, we'll be going through the NL East and the AL East. And that is our show for today. A couple of reminders for you as we leave. Again, mentioned at the top of the show, the new 110 Sports newsletter is available. It comes to your inbox every Friday, delivering the latest 110 Sports shows, podcasts, and written content. You can go to 110sportsmedia.com. On the right side of the homepage, just below the featured stories at the top, we have a box there with all the instructions you need to sign up for the newsletter. Also, check out 110sportsmedia.com for all of our latest written content as we continue to go through the top 100 college basketball players, the greatest 100 college basketball players of the last decade. We are in the final countdown now, so that's going to come out. We'll have another story coming out tomorrow, as well as we're also, of course, counting down re-examining NBA and NFL drafts of the last 10 years. I'm looking at the top 10 players at each position in Major League Baseball over the last 10 years, and as I mentioned, our previews with 3 questions for each team in each division in 2020 in baseball. AL West and NL West are out today. The Central divisions will be out on Thursday. And of course, 110 Sports Network coverage continues live with the J Mole Show tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern with Josh Molnix. Touchline Talk is back at 11 a.m. Eastern on Thursday. Around the Bases, then following that, we'll talk, of course, about the latest headlines and things that transpire over the next couple of days, and then we'll dive into the Central divisions as we did with the Western divisions today. And all 110 Sports Network shows are available at 110sportsmedia.com. Just click on the Videos tab or search for 110 Sports on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and I will talk to you on Thursday.